Welcome to the Ringer NFL show. Sheil Kapadia here with Diante Lee and Steven Ruiz. If you're watching on FanDuel TV, thanks for joining us. If you're listening on Spotify, welcome to the Week 6 show. A lot happened, guys, but I think we're going to do some temperature checks because there were two highlight games, some temperature check games going into the weekend. Cowboys, Lions, and Ravens, Commanders. So we're going to start with those. Sound good?
Let's do it.
Let's get to it.
All right, so let's begin in Dallas because this was the biggest story of the weekend. Now, the game was one thing. Lions completely outclassed the Cowboys. Not close, 47-9, not a competitive game. But if you're a Lions fan, the excitement that you should be feeling from this victory is muted because Aiden Hutchinson suffers a serious leg injury, broke his left tibia in the third quarter of that game, had surgery immediately in Dallas. It was a gruesome injury. They didn't show the replays on TV. You could see it on the players' faces, one of those type deals, which is always tough. So first of all, feel for Aiden Hutchinson, was having an awesome season, and now presumably faces a long road to recovery, not only physically, these things can be mentally, psychologically, emotionally very taxing. So hopefully surgery goes well and he gets on that road to recovery. We'll find out more details later this week. But Diante, moving to the Lions side of this, I mean, they've looked great the last 2 weeks. They've looked like a Super Bowl contender. But now you look at it and you say, man, you lost your best pass rusher. What do you think this means for them based on what we know right now in terms of what this team might look like going forward, their Super Bowl hopes, whether they can withstand that? A lot of things to get to after this Hutchinson injury.
For sure. And I would say that watching that play out in real time and then just thinking about it as the rest of the game went on, I guess I was of two minds. The first thing is thinking about, as you said, just thinking about Aiden Hutchinson and where this season was going for him. Leading the league in sacks up to this point, leading the league in pressures and QB hits up to this point. By any metric, basically, you could look at and say he's been no worse, even by eye test, than maybe the fifth best pass rusher in the NFL. And I would say the metrics support that he's in the top three, if not number one, based on how you measure these things. So that's the first thing, right? And I think that for him, and this is something that I've been critical of, I know that people who pay attention to the defensive side of the ball have brought this up early in his career. I think that the first few years of his career, he was able to kind of get hot in certain games and rack up maybe 3.5, 4 sacks in one game, finish a season with 8 or 9, and you're having questions, and you're maybe asking about where he lands in the greater picture of difference-making pass rushers. This season, though, there was nothing to doubt. The guy from week one had been one of the best pass rushers in the league. So you hate to see a campaign that could have possibly ended not only with playoff wins, but with him getting some personal accolades as potentially being a defensive player of the year. You feel for him from that perspective. And then when you think about his role within this team, we spent so much of the offseason talking about the investments made on the back end to try to play more man coverage. Talking about trying to develop these young linebackers, trying to find help on the defensive interior to help them not only stop the run better, but get after the passer from the interior. And all of those things, whether we acknowledged it verbally or not, all of these things were underpinned with the assumption that Aiden Hutchinson would be available, because he's really the guy that I think makes this defense go, or at least the concept of what would make this defense a high-level playoff contending, Super Bowl contending type of unit. All of that kind of leaned on this guy embodying what that Aaron Glenn, Dennis Allen style of defense is built upon, which is having a big, high-motor pass rusher, and that's exactly what he's been up to this point. So for them not to have him available, I guess I don't know where I want to put them now in the hierarchy of NFC contenders. Obviously we need to get some data points in the future, but I'm kind of curious to see, just for me, and then I want to hear from you guys as well, as to where you think things land for Detroit coming off of this amazing victory, but obviously probably about as bad as you can feel coming off of a marquee signature win.
Yeah, I think it's tough because the last two games, they have 42 points, they have 47 points. So they're averaging around 45 points per game over the last two games. And you can't expect that to continue. You can't expect them to roll up 40 points every week. Like, they're going up against a Brian Flores defense next week with Jared Goff and his history against Brian Flores. So that's going to be difficult to bank on. But earlier in the year, when the offense was kind of struggling and Goff got off to a slow start, this defense led by Hutchinson really carried the team. Like in that Bucs game, when I think that's the game he had the 5 sacks. I don't think that win happens without Aiden Hutchinson. Or I don't think they're competitive in that game without Aiden Hutchinson kind of willing them back into it. So
Right.
I think their ceiling is dramatically different when they're not on their A game on offense. Now, that margin for error for the offense, which is already kind of low because this was a mediocre defense with Hutchinson in there. Now the margin for error is even thinner. If they're not putting up 30 or even 40 points a game against like the top competition, they're going to be in shootouts. They're not going to win these games as comfortably as they have been the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's just not a deep group. You look at it, he has 7.5 sacks. No one else has more than 2.5 sacks. They took a flyer on Marcus Davenport in the offseason. He's out for the year. Any kind of thing you look at with their pass rush, I don't want to say it's completely a one-man show, but it's pretty much as close to a one-man show as you can get to. So to me, it's about like, can they reach a level of competency? I can easily envision a scenario where they lose in the playoffs and you're a Lions fan and you're lamenting the fact that, man, if we had Aiden Hutchinson in this game. At the same time, Lions fans, I'm going to give you some optimism because this NFC is wide open. I still think they have as good of a chance as any team in the NFC to get to the Super Bowl with the way this offense is playing right now. I mean, like the first couple of weeks, the numbers were good, but you're like, it doesn't look exactly like last season. These last 2 weeks, I mean, they're going up and down the field with these where Ben Johnson's getting bored in like the third quarter of these games. Like, all right, what should I call now? What should I, what play that we practiced, with like 2 minutes left to practice on Friday when we were joking around. You want to just go ahead and try that here. So I think they've still got a great chance to get to the Super Bowl. I think it's a team that needs to look at the trade market, leading up to the deadline. I don't have a specific name. I'll tell you, is there a Hassan Reddick move to the Lions here? I don't know what kind of shape Hassan Reddick's in, but when I'm looking at it, I was like, well, what pass rushers might be available? I mean, I can see Dan Campbell just bringing him in, putting his arm around him, saying they didn't want you, we want you, we need you. And all of a sudden he's out there because you can say whatever you want about Reddick. He has just been as consistent a pass rusher as there's been in the NFL over the last 4 or 5 seasons. I feel like Ruiz, they need to make some type of move, and I think they're going to make some type of move. I would be surprised if they were just like, this is our group, no big deal, because their window is right now.
The problem is like those guys are hard to find. That's why you have to draft those guys in the top 5. That's why Detroit went after Hutchinson when they got him. That's why the 49ers kind of built their defense the way they built their defense with all those top 10 picks on the defensive line. So I don't know if there's a guy available outside of Reddick, but I agree with you. They need something. This is a year that they need to capitalize on because you don't know, Goff's extension kicks in. It's going to get harder to maintain this roster, maintain the young pieces on the defense, the guys they've hit on with the draft the last couple of years. So, yeah, I would sell out if I have to. I would take the cues from the Rams. Obviously, Brad Holmes was in that front office before. He knows what an aggressive approach in the front office looks like. So I think he'll be comfortable doing that. We've seen this team build aggressively over the offseason. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do pull off a move. They definitely need one now.
And the in-season trades, you're like, these aren't times when you're trading like first rounders or multiple first rounders. Remember, you mentioned the Rams when they traded for Von Miller. I think they gave up like a second and a third, and that was like, whoa, this is a crazy amount to give up right now. So if you're talking about the next tier, like you don't obviously if you get a star, that's awesome. But I think they just need someone or maybe multiple people that can help them generate enough of a pass rush so that they can play defense the way they want to play defense, so that they can be competent, mediocre, elite offense, mediocre defense. That was their recipe before. It takes a hit without Aiden Hutchinson. Now, what can you do to get as close as you can to that? I think that's their question going forward.
And Aaron Glenn can be a little unhinged with his pressures at times. Like he gets a little reckless with his calls on third down when he's trying to generate pressure. And now that he's going to feel more pressure to generate pressure, we could see some pretty funky blitzes. And I don't know if this secondary is going to be able to handle those assignments because in the past, Detroit's kind of had issues when trying to play that style.
Well, and I think the thing about it is, and the reason why you really feel bad about Aiden Hutchinson suffering this injury is that this was one of the first data points that I think we had up until that Hutchinson injury where you could look and say, hey, they can actually play just like rush 4 defense and a lot of man coverage. And against a quarterback that just lit up man coverage a week ago, you were plastered to guys and you forced multiple turnovers today. It didn't come at the cost of stopping the run. Obviously, Dallas has had issues running the ball on everybody in any defensive scheme. But the fact that you were able to take what you saw on tape from Dallas last Sunday night, and you show up in a primetime game and you're able to really lock this offense down and cause them problems again, were it not for the injury, we would probably be having this conversation more so from the lens of how much distance is there between Detroit and the next team, instead of, well, how small are these margins between Detroit and everybody else in the NFC that's vying for those top 2 seeds.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They still got a shot. They're still among those contenders, like you said, but they've, their season took a little bit of a turn this afternoon. Again, it sucked. You're a fan. You're like, that's as fun of a game as you can have. You're just going up and down the field. They're showing shots of Jerry Jones being sad in the box. You're like, this
birthday.
is why I know. It was his birthday. I know. You're like, this is why, for all the disappointment that sports fandom brings, it's afternoons like this that make it awesome. And then all of a sudden in the third quarter. So, again, hopefully Hutchinson recovers, but we'll get more details on that injury this week. All right, the other team that played in that game. I mean,
did they show up?
Yeah, did they show? I don't know. It looks like a completely fraudulent team, the Dallas Cowboys. We had this conversation last week where Diante and I said, hey, the NFC's kind of wide open. Who knows? They could go on a heater and be in the mix. And Ruiz said, what are you, nuts? They got no chance to be in the mix. Ruiz, you looked pretty smart today, because that Cowboys team looked like a complete disaster.
No, and I think we all have this game pegged on the Friday show, the preview show. We were like, this is like the worst possible matchup for this Cowboys offense and the type of issues they're having, and you saw it. I was kind of a week behind on my prediction that Dak Prescott would throw an interception right over the middle of the field to a safety against the Steelers. It happened against the Lions. Brian Branch got that pick and returned it for a touchdown. But I mean, the fact that you could predict these blowouts and then they come true, that's the saddest part from the Cowboys' perspective. And that's the part that makes you lose all hope in this team and what this team can be down the stretch. Like, even if they get Micah Parsons back and DeMarcus Lawrence back, obviously that's going to make things easier on defense, but they look so far away. And that's just on the defensive side. On the offensive side, I don't know what the answer is to these problems. Because I think it's personnel based. I think it's scheme based. I don't think Dak Prescott's playing his best football. I think he's doing his best considering the circumstances, but he's missing more throws than we're used to seeing with him. And those throws are turning into interceptions. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of like the inverse of his luck on tight window throws last year. Now those throws are turning into picks like they did in 2022, and we're seeing the same type of season. I don't know how you rebound from this. I'm sure they'll play better down the stretch. They'll look passable by the time December rolls around. This is a division that's wide open. They're not out of it by any means, but they have a negative 42 point differential at this point. Here's a list of teams in the NFC that have a worse point differential: the Carolina Panthers and the Rams. That's it. Ooh. That's the end of the list. The Giants have a better one. The Eagles, for all their problems, have a way better one at -6. This team looks terrible, and there are no stats that suggest it's going to get better. The only thing that will make it better is Parsons coming back and Lawrence coming back.
I mean, to me, and this is a conversation we've had about the Bengals, and I think that this has just been borne out over this season when we talk about these teams and whether or not they're contenders or pretenders. It is so clear that if you only have one way to win, it's just not good enough this year in the league.
Yes.
And the Cowboys are maybe the perfect example of a team that only has had one pathway to being competitive, and you're playing against a Detroit team that can beat you several ways. And they were basically put them all on display today. They were able to run the ball when they wanted to. Jared Goff, again, was extremely efficient in the passing game. They have the scheme advantage, the coaching advantage. And, I think that because when you put all those things together, that confluence of events, you can just see the strain on everything that Dak Prescott's doing in the pocket. He can't afford to get pressured because he can't trust that any receiver that's not CeeDee Lamb can go get the separation he needs to get the ball out of his hands quickly. He can't rely on a run game. I always think about the Cowboys in comparison to other contenders in the league. And when I think about the Chiefs and how much we've complained about Kansas City, the one thing that we can all say for certain is that they have answers. It might be an uninspiring answer, but they would have a way, if you're seeing all this man coverage, to be able to loosen up receivers, whether we like the targets that these guys are getting or not. Watching other teams around the league, I think the same things are true. When you watch the Cowboys, it's so clear that Detroit just felt like, hey, they might get us on a couple 10 to 15 yard completions, but we know all their stuff. It's not going to change. You know who they want to target and when they want to target them. You know who they trust in what situation, and you know that the run game's not a threat. And even for a defensive backfield that's had its struggles this year, you could just see the confidence in how they played. And I would say, like, outside of like a handful of like designed motion and the crosser and mesh concepts where they were able to get guys loose, you didn't see many guys open down the field for Dallas today. And that's just emblematic to the way they've built this team and how obvious some of these holes are.
Yeah, I mean, the defensive side of it, it's pretty simple. Like, they're injured and they don't have the guys. And I thought Mike Zimmer maybe would be a guy who could do more with less. It doesn't look like he's able to do that right now, and they're getting killed. The offensive part of this, to me, is probably the more interesting discussion, because they had a lot of these same things in place last year, and the offense was a top 10 offense by every efficiency metric you want to look at. Now, the run game was a little bit, better. You had Tony Pollard. You could look at the secondary and tertiary receivers. You had Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. They weren't the best, second and third wide receivers in the NFL, but they were more competent. And now you kind of mix it all together where the scheme is uninspiring. Like you guys said, Dak Prescott just attempts more hard throws than any quarterback in the NFL. I think he's been more mistake prone this year, whether that's him feeling like he has to do everything because they have no run game. I don't know, but I think it's pretty clear he's not playing as well as he was last season. And then, you look at the supporting cast, you add all those things together. This offense, this was the second worst offensive performance by any team in a game this season. They didn't score a touchdown. Like, that's unacceptable for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. I don't care if you throw any other 9 guys out there or 9 guys out there with them on offense, and who the coach is, you should be able to score a couple touchdowns, and it's the Lions. This isn't a juggernaut of a defense. Prescott right now is 26th in dropback success rate. Like, this is this offense, I don't think it's just like it's almost nearing like, wait, is it completely broken, not just struggling? Like, they're going to have good games against bad defenses, but overall, if you're a Cowboys fan, what you've seen in the first 6 weeks of the season has to be very, very concerning.
Especially when you watch what Ben Johnson did on the other sideline, like comparing those two offenses. Like, they were just like the Detroit, like you said, in the second half, they were just pulling off bits. Like, they were doing joke.
They were in a hook and ladder to an offensive tackle.
I mean, that's so embarrassing.
So good.
Like, if you're Mike McCarthy, you have to walk across the sideline and fight Dan Campbell at that point. That's the only way to save face. Like, I don't know how Jerry sits back and watches that. They have the bye this week. So that's always like, the red zone area for coaches on the hot seat. And then after that, a Sunday nighter at San Francisco. We know how those games go for Dallas. That could be a national embarrassment for them. And if they lose that game, like, if Jerry doesn't make a move at this point, I'm questioning him. Like, what are you doing? Wake up.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that we know that he's not willing to make those types of moves. Otherwise, this move probably would have been made last spring or last winter when it was clear that Dallas was out of gas and that they did not have any answers. And they've rolled out the exact same approach. And now that we do have injuries on the defensive side, there's nowhere for Mike McCarthy's issues to hide right now. You can try to put this off on Mike Zimmer all you want, and I do think that there are some issues, even when healthy, that they have to sort out. But it's very clear that at this point now, Mike McCarthy is failing his quarterback very similarly to how people felt like he was letting Aaron Rodgers down in his prime in Green Bay.
And this is the third time he's hired a defensive coordinator, and the third time he's opted for a veteran one that many people would say are probably past their prime. I think it was Mike Nolan was his first defensive coordinator. That was a disaster in year one, if you remember that. Then obviously I almost said Gus Bradley. Sorry, I do not mean to offend Dan Quinn that much to that degree. But Dan Quinn, obviously they had like a top 5 defense, but they had their issues in high leverage situations in the playoffs against the best teams. And that's when you want to win if you're going to win the Super Bowl, obviously. And then now the Mike Zimmer hire, I know there's been injuries, but even when those guys were in there, it looked a little shaky. So whether it's the offense, the design of the offense and how that looks, or it's his decisions to hire these defensive minds that are kind of past their best, it doesn't look good for him all around.
An NFC East team that might be regretting keeping its head coach? Well, we may have more on that later in the show. All right, let's take a break. We come back. We talk about the other highlight temperature check game of the week. We're back on the Ringer NFL show. Other game, we all said we got to have eyes on this game. was Ravens Commanders, which again, before the season, who would have thought Ravens Commanders in week 6? What do you mean you all have to have eyes on that game? Ravens win this football game 30-23. I want to start with Baltimore, and I can get us started with the temperature check here. I think this is the best Lamar Jackson has ever played, which is a crazy thing to say about a guy who's won 2 MVPs. I think he's easily the MVP of the league through 6 weeks. I wouldn't think twice if I don't get a ballot. Someone want to get me a ballot. If I had a ballot, I would have Lamar on there. What they did today, and I know it's the Commanders defense. They're stringing together 90-yard drives like it's a Wednesday practice or something. I mean, he could not miss today. They had 8 possessions. They scored on 6 of them. They had 28 first down, 484 yards. He's just dicing opponents up from the pocket, 20 for 26 for 323 yards. I mean, this Ravens offense, like if you were thinking the moves they've made over the last 2 seasons here, Todd Monken was one of them, and then Derrick Henry this offseason. If you were thinking of like the best case scenario, I think you pretty much saw that today, where teams do not want to tackle Derrick Henry. As the game goes on, go watch those Commanders defenders. He has 132 yards. Zay Flowers was terrific in this game. Rashad Bateman had big catches in this game. Mark Andrews looked more like Mark Andrews in this game. Finally, like it's all coming together. Lamar Jackson right now is 3rd in EPA per pass play, and he's 8th in the entire NFL in rushing yards. These are silly numbers, and it's so funny thinking back to when they were 0-2. Now it's like this season couldn't be going any better for them, specifically offensively. So I think I don't want to get bored with like how well Lamar Jackson is playing, Diante, because what he did today, and the margin for error wasn't great. We'll get to the Commanders in a minute, but like if they aren't as sharp as they were today offensively, they might lose that game. But they just, every time the Commanders had something, they came back and had a scoring drive.
And it was the best piece of it to me watching Lamar the last 2 weeks is against Cincinnati. You saw him respond to pressure looks very well. Exotic looks very well. Washington didn't throw exotic looks at him as much as just a lot of tight coverage, right? And to me, my biggest question mark for this offense is there going to be an answer with getting guys open downfield when you don't have a go-to X receiver type that goes out and wins on the boundary when you see teams that want to play tight coverage? And today was a great step in the right direction. Obviously, the Commander secondary isn't going to inspire a lot of confidence in relation to the rest of the league. But I do like the fact that Rashad Bateman was able to get loose in a way that, earlier in the year, I was texting buddies of mine like, hey, man, what's it going to take for this thing to work between Bateman and Lamar? Right. And I think that now we're starting to see some hints at what he can be as that X receiver. You see Zay Flowers working in the middle of the field. And I think that Todd Monken at this stage now has a different level of confidence and understanding at what Lamar does well in the pocket. And you really see them leaning on the things that he does best, which is working the middle of field from the pocket. He has always been underrated, I think, in that facet of his game throughout his career. And this was another great opportunity for people to watch what he can do when he's in full command. And like you said, this year has probably been the best that I've ever seen him play. And it would be hard to be better than he was in 2019.
He's on pace for 4,300 passing yards and 1,100 rush yards. Like we've never seen numbers like that. We've never seen numbers like that. If he doesn't win MVP, it's because we're tired of voting for him for MVP. It would be his 3rd MVP in like his last 4 fully healthy seasons. I think maybe his last 3 fully healthy seasons. He wins MVP every time he plays a full season. And like this, the one concern is still the offensive line, because we saw what that did to the team over the first 2 weeks, and we saw it against teams that can capitalize on those issues. We haven't really seen them play another team like that. So I don't know what's going to happen when this offense isn't playing on the front foot like it did today in Washington. Like you said, Sheil, like it did whatever it wanted, just marched down the field. The only time it really lost the ball was when they couldn't hold on to it. Mark Andrews, a ball bounces off his hands, gets intercepted. There was a botched snap that kind of killed the drive and made them settle for 3. But other than that, up and down the field, they average over 3 points per possession, just 9 drives in this one, and they get 30 points off it. Just 1 total turnover for the entire game. This was like a well-played game on both sides of the ball, and that's what stood out to me, was just how competitive this game was in a rivalry that we really don't have any memories from, even though there should be more hate, because there's certainly a lot of hate between the Washington and Baltimore sports fans. I've been around it my whole life. There's definitely some resentment there. And I think over the next decade, we could see this rivalry kind of take off if these 2 quarterbacks are what we think they will be. Obviously, Lamar is already there, but Jaden Daniels, I thought this was maybe his most impressive and meaningful performance
Yes.
to date.
Yeah, speak on that, because I was going to take it there next. So go ahead, expand on that. He was 20 for 35 for 269 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think I agree with you, but I want to hear what you have to say about it first.
Yeah. We talked about this last week. We hadn't really seen the offense play left-handed yet. We hadn't seen a defense take away their early down stuff and force them to play on 3rd and long. And that happened in this game. Like the Commanders couldn't run the football. They had 0 explosive plays in the run game for the first time all year. They had a 0% success rate running the ball in the red zone, which, stalls out a bunch of drives. They couldn't run, and they were forcing Jaden Daniels to play from the pocket. He only had 4 scrambles in this game. It was his lowest scramble rate all season long. And the pass game was still productive, at least when they weren't pressured. Like, Daniels had his worst game under pressure in this one because the Ravens were able to keep him in the pocket. But he moved the ball. Whenever Washington needed him to make a throw, he made the throw. The throw was on target. It gave the receiver a chance. I think he completed nearly 70% of his passes for the 4th time this season. And it felt like he could have completed more because every throw gave his receiver a chance. It was a good performance. Like, I know it's a tough loss for Washington, and you really wanted that like signature win for the program, but God, I would be feeling really good about this game. I would not be feeling good about that defense though, because the Ravens just like did the same thing over and over again. I don't know how many in-breaking routes the Ravens caught in this game, but it just seemed like the middle of the field was a free-for-all, and Dan Quinn like never adjusted. It's hard to adjust when it's Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in the backfield, but you got to do something, man.
Yeah, that's why I almost give everybody like a mulligan against the Ravens. I don't know what the right answer is, especially with their personnel. I'm with you. Try different stuff, but
have Chris Jones, Max Crosby.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you have guys up front who can just dominate, that's one. But man, I'm with you with Jaden Daniels. I thought he was fantastic in this game. Like they ran 18 times for 52 yards, so you couldn't run the ball. You're playing from behind. You're facing a team that if you like make mistakes, they're just gonna run away with it. Your defense couldn't get a stop. And they're just in that game the entire time, going back and forth. I thought he was making throws on the move. He's making high degree of difficulty throws. He's a really smart player. Like he like dirted the ball. I think it was the end of the first half, I want to say. And Romo had a good call out. Like with the clock where it is right now, the guy was wide open, but he's like, you complete that pass and all of a sudden you have to use a timeout or time is ticking. Like it seems to be processing, knowing game situation really, really quickly. I'm with you. I wrote the same thing down. I would feel great after this loss if I was a Commanders fan. Like, wait, our quarterback can do that on the road against a team that's playing as well as any team in the NFL right now. And I just look at the box score every week, and this is no shade to any of these players. But yes, Terry McLaurin is a very good wide receiver. The other leading target getters for the Washington Commanders, Noah Brown, Zach Ertz, Austin Eckler, Olamide Zaccheaus. These were all players who were available for very low, reasonable salaries this offseason. This is who he's working with, and he's first in the NFL in EPA per pass play. Last 2 weeks, he goes up against Jim Schwartz and then this Ravens defense. And the game, Diante has not looked like, it doesn't look like stuff's moving too fast for him. It doesn't look like the stage is too big for him. I hate to use the cliches of like calm and poised, but man, I get excited every time I've watched him this season.
I mean, a couple of weeks ago when you were saying like, hey, if this keeps up, Jaden Daniels has got to be in the MVP conversation, and we were offering pushback. A lot of that was because I wanted to see how he would react when game script was not in his favor, when the down and distance situations was not in his favor. And I'm blown away that we did not see any bad habits crop up. The fact that he has been as good with his ball security as he's been under pressure has probably been the biggest revelation to this point. Outside of a bad interception against Cleveland last week, I mean, even being under pressure today, knowing that you've got a lot of zone coverage, a lot of changing looks on the back end, the fact that he did stay poised, played calm, played as quickly as he could, trying to move through his progressions. I thought that for as little scrambling as we did see, I thought that he was wise with how he managed the pocket and tried to avoid making bad situations worse. I have nothing negative to say about him. I think if there's one thing to note, and this is something that I've been kind of looking at since week 2 when they really started heating up, this is the number 1 offense in passing EPA in the open field And for people who don't understand field zones, that's basically like from the -11 to the +25, right, is what you would consider the open field. They're the number one offensive passing EPA in that situation. But once you get into the red zone, they're 21st in EPA per dropback, 21st in completion percentage at 51%, and they're 19th in success rate in the passing game at 40%. I don't think that that's totally a reflection on Daniels. I think that that speaks to some of the things that Steven called out on our Friday show about this offense giving him a lot of easy buttons when you've got the whole field in front of you, and some of Cliff Kingsbury's issues that come up when teams are able to play a little bit tighter, when you're going to see a little bit more pressure, teams are going to play a little bit more aggressively. But I do think for Daniels, and this is something to look at that I'm interested to see how he responds to over this middle stretch of the season, is how does he use his legs in those situations? Because Washington did leave some points on the field today against Baltimore. There's a field goal that they have to take early where you were driving. You had an opportunity to get 6. You miss out there. The fact that they couldn't run the ball this week, you could really feel it in those tight spaces when you get into the red zone and you're trying to back Baltimore off of you. So I am interested to see how this offense grows from there. But specific to Jaden Daniels, I mean, outside of that one little note, man, there's really not much to complain about in his game right now. And I would say he's pretty clearly the rookie of the year, unless something significant happens before the end of October.
He did take some hits today, which, I thought he's actually done a much better job of that than I was anticipating based on what we saw at LSU last year. But yeah, this was a game where, early on, Kyle Hamilton, when they were running that bootleg, and Kyle Hamilton was right there and drilled him, and he completing the pass good. Those kinds of hits, obviously, that was just one example. There were some other ones too. But yeah, if you're a Commanders fan, you are having an exciting season. All right, we'll take a break. We come back and we will plant our flags. What are we planting our flags on after week 6? We'll get to that in a minute. All right, we're back on the Ringer NFL show. I'll start us off. Where are we planting our flag? For people, new listeners, this is what we do in the second segment. Just, have a take after what you saw. My take, I'm going to keep it real predictable. The Nick Sirianni era is over. And you're saying, what are you talking about? I didn't really have eyes on that game. I thought the Eagles won that game. No, they won the game. They beat the Browns 20-16. After the game, Nick Sirianni is just gesturing to fans behind. They're playing a home game, mind you. He's gesturing to fans behind the Eagles bench. You don't know exactly what he said, but it was kind of like, what are you going to say now? We won the game type of interaction, which in and of itself, it's like, come on, man, you got to grow up. You went over this last year. You know what the owner doesn't approve of this type of behavior. You have that. Then he has what could only be described as one of the more bizarre press conferences I've seen from an Eagles head coach in my lifetime. And I do not say that lightly. He was all over the place in this press conference. He's saying a few different things. Like, one, he said he made the play call on a 3rd-and-1 sack at the end of the first half that kind of shifted the game. Now, for those who don't know, Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator and the play caller. Sirianni has been stripped of all his duties with the offense, but I guess in that moment, he felt like he wanted to make the play call. Then he volunteers information that he made a defensive play call with Vic Fangio as your defensive coordinator. He said, again, Sirianni volunteered this information that he made a call on defense that did not work out. Another point in the press conference, he was asked about some red zone possession, and he said he had his head down on a 3rd and 8, so he didn't really see it, and he doesn't know why he does that, but he did that. Listen,
What else are you supposed to be looking at in a football game as a head football coach? I don't understand.
Who's not supposed to be calling offensive plays or defensive plays? I don't know. I don't know what you're supposed to be looking at. But, the fact of the matter is, this was just some kind of boring October win that you have in the course of a season where you say, hey, it wasn't pretty, but a win is a win. You're 3-2. You're coming off your bye. You're just staying in the mix. But from the time the clock hit 0 to when that press conference ended, Nick Sirianni became the story again. It's been almost every week this season. He is making himself the story. A lot of times it's with in-game decision stuff. This is what happened afterwards. So my previous stance was that the Eagles were going to have kind of a ho-hum season. It wasn't going to be good enough, and he was going to be fired after the season. I really don't know now if he's going to last this season. If this is what you're looking like coming out of the bye and you're already having these issues even after the team wins, I can't imagine ownership is looking at this saying, we feel confident that he's going to be our leader of the future. So Diante, I know you were plugged in to some of this. I feel like you were biting your tongue there. You just wanted to yell at 4 different moments as I was talking. But this is like it feels like a new low in what has been a season of lows for the head coach.
I mean, we have to look at a pattern of behavior because this isn't just an isolated incident, right? You go back to the Falcons game on Monday night. You have an opportunity to put that game away. You come out and you try to push the ball on a 3rd down instead of running it to allow the clock to run and put yourself in a better position to kick a field goal or go for it on a 4th and shorter, presumably, obviously assuming that Saquon Barkley will gain yards there. You come back the next week against New Orleans. I think they had a tush-push failure that he said that he made the call on, and now you have this instance, and it's not just what you said. There's also chirping at Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. For reasons that are still unknown to me. You have the face in the crowd and giving them the what for after a nail-biting kind of win over a team that we think is probably about as adrift as there is in the NFL in Cleveland right now. And then I guess my favorite part about it is pregame, he comes in with the shaved head, neon red flag. We're already talking about a guy that is probably not in the best place right now, mentally and emotionally. And then I think if there's one thing I will give him credit for after this just disaster of managing the sideline, something, by the way, that the team owner has already flagged as an issue and something that is not his favorite characteristic in his head coach right now. Instead of facing any of those tough questions and just saying like, hey, here's the exact process, he's dodging things. And then the best part about it is he brings all his kids to the presser as like hey man, got my meat shields with me. You wouldn't want to hurt my feelings while I'm sitting here in front of my baby boys, right? Like you wouldn't want to hurt me now, would you? So to me, and I think you said this, I know we joked about it before the show, talking about coaches getting fired after a winning effort. But man, I just don't know if you're Jeffrey Lurie and you're Howie Roseman and you're meeting at the start of this week talking about the outlook for this team, how can you say that your head coach has the answers when it is so clear to me that he is struggling to do the things that he has been tasked to do, which is pretty simple. It's just managing the game and making sure that this team is executing the way that it needs to be. And you can look at it, whether it's game management by analytics, you can look at the way that they've managed this roster. You can look at their usage of guys or the lack thereof. And the results that we're seeing are just not inspiring enough. And this just feels like different means to the same end as last season when this team was winning close games and everybody who understood what they were looking at was saying that this is a paper tiger and this team feels like a paper tiger again, which you should never feel that way when you have a guy like A.J. Brown or Saquon Barkley or this offensive line in your employ. So I don't know how they continue on with this guy.
I'm just imagining Sirianni just like shaping his head and never breaking eye contact with the reflection in the mirror as he was doing it. Just like the saddest haircut you can imagine. I'm ready to see Big Dom coach this team at this point. I mean, it can't be any worse. Even this game, like it was the game that we kind of predicted. Like the game plan should be just throw it up to those superstar receivers you have on the outside and like hope it works a couple times and then you score. And that's exactly what happened. Like A.J. Brown is the coach of this team, basically.
Yeah. MVP. Coach, whatever you want to say. Yeah, he saved them in multiple instances today. So it's as weird and as bad a feeling as you can have about a 3-2 team in the NFL, I think, unless I'm forgetting somebody. All right.
I feel like both coaches in this game were like, man, I'm glad I'm not that guy.
That guy, right. Well, I don't know, at least I don't have it as bad as that guy. And I don't know if either one of them is telling the truth in that situation.
Well, listen, Diante and I have speculated that maybe one guy might become the other guy next season. I'm just plant that away, depending on how these 2 seasons go. Kevin Stefanski, Philadelphia native. All right, take a break. We'll get to Ruiz and Diante's flag plan. right, we're back on the Ringer NFL show. Ruiz, what do you got? What are you planting your flag on this week?
This is not going to come as a surprise to anybody on this podcast or anybody listening to, but I've seen enough of Derek Carr. Like, I don't need to see any more Derek Carr starts this year. The Saints are 2-4. They've lost 4 games in a row. Spencer Rattler made his first start today. And while they ended up getting blown out by the Bucs, I thought Rattler looked like he belonged in the NFL, like he belonged as a starter. Like, if you would have told me this was a first-round rookie quarterback making his first start against a playoff competition. And Todd Bowles isn't the easiest assignment. I know he has his lows with his defense, but when Todd Bowles is like pitching on it, like he's on a heater, it's really hard to play against him. And I thought Rattler really competed for the first about 3/4 of the game, and then the wheels fell off. And he threw some ugly picks. He made some dumb plays. But at the same time, that's almost endearing when like you're comparing him to Derek Carr, who we complain doesn't do enough of that when the team is down. Like when the chips are down, he just kind of folds. The one thing I'll say about Rattler in this game, he didn't fold. He kept trying. He was making plays outside of the pocket. He was throwing downfield, throwing it into tight windows. And I thought he did a good job of like executing Clint Kubiak's offense early on in the game, like doing the play action, the boot stuff. He was competent in that area. And now that the season seems to be over, obviously Carr's going to miss the next couple of games, so Rattler's going to get a chance anyway. If they're like 2-6, 2-7, what's the point of going back to Carr? That's not the future in New Orleans, and maybe there's an outside chance that Rattler is. I think he's shown enough to at least, warrant a chance.
Yeah. I think the point that you made about him looking like a guy that they maybe took a chance on in the first round is the exact note that I had, especially towards the end of the first half, right? When he kind of started heating up in the drop back game, not just with the play action passes, but being able to create space in the pocket, being able to get outside the pocket or outside of structure. You see the arm talent really flashed in those moments. And I think that was what was able to keep this team in the game. I think that this was probably going to be a big Saints loss no matter what. In the second that Tampa Bay kind of reclaimed their hold of the game in the third quarter, you could see that New Orleans didn't have enough answers to stay within reach. But I think for the most part, man, you come away from this, if you're Spencer Rattler, if you're that offensive staff, feeling like, hey, if we're going to have these offensive line issues and guys are going to be in and out of the lineup and we're going to be missing a tackle here, a guard here, our center is nicked and bruised up, you probably want a quarterback like Rattler running this thing, because he never folded in terms of pushing the ball down the field. He was looking to be aggressive at every turn, even when it did not play out well. And I think that for that reason alone, you should probably look at, like Steven said, if things aren't looking great at the end of October, just keep it rolling with this young guy. Give him an opportunity to prove that he can give you something. And if not, this was probably just going to be a lost quarterback room no matter what.
Yeah, they're 2-4 on the season now. Like you mentioned, Ruiz, it seems like only yesterday we were talking about the Saints getting off to a hot start, but Rattler goes 22 for 40 for 243 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, 5 sacks. I mean, we have to remember what rookie quarterbacks generally look like. That is a respectable line for a rookie quarterback making his first career start.
And
their defense.
Yeah, down 17-0 to start the game. So negative game script the whole game, basically.
Yeah, then they scored 27 points in the second quarter. They had 4 consecutive drives where they scored. 2 were short drives, but they put together 2 long drives there in the second quarter. And then you mentioned it in the second half. I mean, their defense couldn't get a stop here, giving up 51 points, but you scored 27. So enough there to sometimes you just got to pass the this could be really, 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 really bad test. And it feels like he at least he passed that test and maybe more with this start. So anytime you have a young quarterback, adds a little juice. I think juice is the word. Derek Carr versus Spencer, new blood in Spencer Rattler versus old blood in Derek Carr. Which option is going to give your season a little more juice if you're a Saints fan? I think it's obviously got to be Spencer Rattler. All right, we'll take one more break. Then we come back. Diante, got to find out where you're planting your flag. All right, we're back on the Ringer NFL show. Diante, what do you got?
I'm really glad that we did all the Jaden Daniels talk early, so that way all the Commanders fans can be pleased with, me kind of giving my praises in that direction. Because the flag that I'm planting here is rookie of the year or not, the way that Caleb Williams is playing the quarterback position right now gives the Chicago Bears a legitimate shot to contend for the NFC. And I think that today was a great opportunity, I think, to show the growth between what we saw in September and what we're seeing now. Two of the things that he's really struggled with up to this point in the year has been taking sacks that he didn't need to take and forcing the ball in ways that he didn't need to against tight coverage. And if there's one thing that we know about Ryan Nielsen is that he likes to play man and he wants to use big bodies up front to try to make the quarterback uncomfortable. And I think that Caleb Williams handled himself probably his best that he has all game, even if the numbers as far as yardage does not reflect that. I thought that he was great in the red zone against tight man coverage. That's where you can really see the changing of arm angles, the ability to extend and get away from pressure, being able to force the ball, up the sideline or in the seams, versus a closing defender. And then I think in the open field, what you saw was some sack avoidance that we didn't see earlier in the year. And a lot of that comes back to being decisive, knowing when to tuck the ball and run. I thought we saw some really good Caleb Williams scrambles. And I think that now that they've got a little bit more complementary football happening around him in terms of building on this run game, having Keenan Allen healthy to give him another outlet to get the ball out quickly to, we're starting to see the Chicago Bears team that we maybe, kind of talked about potentially being a sleeper in the NFC. That's exactly what this team looks like right now. And basically since the end of that Texans game, we've been looking at a quarterback operating on a pretty high level.
I feel like so much of the talk, especially before the draft and over the first couple of weeks when he struggled, is about how he extends plays and holds on to the ball. But the thing that's been most impressive to me, especially over the last couple of weeks, is how quickly from the moment he decides to make a throw to the moment it gets to the receiver's hands, how quick that is. It's like an instant.
Yes.
I think that's the thing that stood out is his quick game accuracy, not only like where he's placing the ball, but how quickly he's getting the ball there and the pace he puts on the ball. That's true arm talent. Like there are quarterbacks in this league that can throw a bullet, but they have to put their whole body into it and they sacrifice precision to get the ball there in a hurry. I think Baker Mayfield is probably the best example out of anybody. Kirk Cousins is another person who, gets off his center line and his head is going to the side because he's putting so much into throws just to get it out to the sideline. But not with Caleb. Like it's there in an instant. It's like, you remember those like old thing? I don't know. They might still have them, but like the drive-through ATMs at the bank where like they had the little capsule that goes up the tube and shoots back to the bank teller. That's like how he throws the football and delivers the football in the quick game. It's amazing to watch.
Yeah, this was, Caleb Williams was 23 for 29, 226 yards. But I think the more important question we have to make an executive decision on here is Shane Waldron off of fraud watch after this game or not yet? I thought this was I'll give my take. I thought this was a nice combination of Caleb Williams playing really well, them scheming up some nice stuff offensively, and then the defense. I mean, their defense was down some other, good players, and you wouldn't have known it from that performance. All right. Appreciate everyone watching on FanDuel TV. For more, you can check us out on Spotify or Ringer NFL on YouTube. Don't forget Ringer NFL on YouTube. You can catch us there as well or wherever you get your podcasts.